Welcome to Engineering Internships. This is a discussion presented in partnership with the Chicago Engineers Foundation and Destination Internship. I'm Debbie Burrell, the Executive Director of Chicago Engineers Foundation. We are very pleased to present this discussion to share best practices to find and secure great summer internships. And to get things started, let's introduce our organizations. The mission of the Chicago Engineers Foundation is to encourage and empower the next generation of engineers. Our organization proudly supports students across Chicago with K through 12 learning opportunities, up to $100,000 in scholarship awards presented annually, and career resources to help college students achieve their engineering career goals. More information about Chicago Engineers Foundation can be found at our website, chicagoengineersfoundation.org, or via our social media platforms. And it's now my pleasure to introduce the co-founders of Destination Internship, Matthew and Michael Kadis. They established Destination Internship in 2020. And Matt and Mike, please tell us a little bit about yourselves and Destination Internship.
Well, hello and good evening. My name's Matt Kadis, and like Debbie said, my brother and I started Destination Internship last year, based off the idea that we can help students by sharing our experiences and the knowledge that we've developed by getting internships. And basically all of the information we share and the experiences we share come directly from people we've talked to who have gotten great internships, recruiters we've talked to, and overall from our own experience. A little bit about myself. I am a senior at the University of Kentucky studying electrical engineering. In terms of internship experience, which I guess what we're all here for, I've interned at Tesla, SpaceX, John Deere, Johnson & Johnson, and ExxonMobil. So, Mike?
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. Hey, everyone. My name is Michael Kadis, and I am a current junior at Purdue University studying industrial engineering as well as finance. Matt covered the beginning of Destination Internship really well. But, and just to add to that, we felt our combined experiences in terms of internships and networking, working with recruiters and going through the hiring process it would be effective to share that information because, we've found proven types of resources and tips and advice that has worked for us across many different companies. And so we'd really like to have the opportunity to share that with other people. And we think a lot of it goes unsaid in typical college recruiting environments where people, maybe not familiar with the recruiting industry, especially with how, the tech world and overall companies have developed the past 10 years. So some of the information in our experiences was a bit outdated with regards to what we are actually experiencing with HR companies or with the HR teams at various companies. So just to add to that, and then some of my personal experience, as I mentioned, I'm a junior at Purdue studying industrial engineering and finance. I'm currently interning at Apple. And then this past summer, I worked at SpaceX and then previously at Tesla. And before that at Exelon, which is a utilities company, electrical utilities company in the Midwest. And then next summer, I'll be working at McKinsey & Company in their Chicago office. And we're both, really looking forward to sharing our experiences and answering some of the questions today.
Great. Thank you both so much for being here. As we start our discussion and we get things rolling, we're going to be covering several topics, kind of in a little outline format. We'll be talking, of course, about finding internship opportunities, where to start, where to look. We'll be talking about applying for positions and some best practices there. We're also going to talk about networking, both virtual and in person, and finish things up with interview preparation, getting ready for those big days. Throughout these different topics today, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to put them into the chat. We'll get to as many of your questions and thoughts as possible during the discussion or during the Q&A that we'll hold at the end of the event. We're also recording tonight's presentation. You will receive a copy of the recording in a few days, we're also going to be sharing what we call our best practices handout. Some of the best tips that you're going to hear today from our co-founders of DI. We're going to be sharing those with you, and so feel free, put your pencils down. Don't worry about taking a ton of notes. We're going to send you a ton of resources as well as contact information for Chicago Engineers Foundation and Destination Internships. So you're welcome to follow up afterwards and have all that great info in front of you as you hit the ground running for internship season. So, with all that being said, let's get things started. Let's get into our topics. And the first one we're going to cover today is finding internship positions. So, as we know, searching for internships they can be quite challenging, and we're going to discuss some of the best practices and ways and resources to find open position announcements. So, first question for Matt and Mike: what are your preferred sources for finding open internship positions?
Well, like you said, finding internships can be really challenging, and in my opinion, one of the, well, not opinion, experience, the longest part of the whole process of just getting an internship is finding what you're going to apply to. And some of the sources I like to use, first is called Search for Jobs on Google. It's basically Google's platform to search for jobs. For example, if you look up in a Google search 2022 summer internship electrical engineering, any term you want, there will be a little pop-up in that search result that is jobs related, and you can expand to see search for jobs, and it will allow you to filter those results by industry or company and whatnot. So basically that compilation comes from different sources all across the internet. So it's all these individual job boards, the postings from there are put on this basically platform that Google made up to help job searchers. So that's like my number one source for finding positions to apply to. Second is LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn's really powerful in terms of just finding roles and finding people that you can network with. The ways I like to find roles on LinkedIn are either through like the job section where jobs are straight up posted, but also seeing what posts people are making on LinkedIn. That's a really unique strategy that a lot of people aren't really aware of. If you go on LinkedIn and look up hiring intern just in your search and search for posts, you can see posts that, for example, recruiters made with actual job postings. So that's another really valuable and little known technique for finding different roles. Lastly, though, when it comes to applying, in my experience, applying directly on a company website by far is the best thing to do. And if you know a particular company or industry that you're interested in, your best bet is always going to the company website and going to the career section on that website to search for roles, because that is that's the be all end all, and you'll find everything you need there. And that's where these roles are going to be posted. In addition to that, there might also be some outdated roles that are really important to make you aware of what roles might pop up in the future. So overall, to sum that up, the search for jobs on Google function, if you just look up search for jobs on Google, you'll find a description of what that really means. LinkedIn, searching on the job section and searching for posts on LinkedIn. And then most importantly of all those, company websites, if you know the company that you're interested or even the industry that you're really interested in. So those overall my recommendation.
Those are some great tips. Are there any other ones? Any hidden gems that you guys like to look at aside from job boards or company websites? Do you have any additional hidden sources to share?
I wouldn't say this is hidden, but it's pretty, at least in my experience, not very utilized as much as others. And that is internal college job boards. Certain employers work with your career center to be able to say, hey, we're looking for your students for this type of job. And sometimes they're looking for university specific students to create, fulfill like, certain numbers from different regions or things like that. And universities typically have their own job boards or opportunities or employer connection sites that I'm sure your university's career center would be able to help you with, because most have some general partnerships, and that one I think is very underrated. It's literally they're looking for students from your college, and so you fit the bill, and it's a much narrower pool that they're looking for. And so I would definitely recommend reaching out to your career center for any potential insight on if there's specific job postings or employers that they have partnerships with, strong connections with, things like that could definitely be very helpful.
I would 100% agree with that. That it is in a sense a hidden gem because you really don't know what conversations are going on between your career development office and then all these companies that need to hire. So that's could be called your hidden gem because those are conversations you're not privy to. But when you actually put in the effort to reach out to the whoever is working in your university or college's career development office, then you get the idea in their head that, hey, this student really wants a role. So what can I do to help that student? So I actually think that's a really good idea, Mike.
And we have a question from one of our guests about Handshake. That advisors are trying to get everyone to set up their Handshake profile. Do either of you have any success stories to share about using Handshake?
I I've used Handshake before. I have a profile on Handshake. To be fair, it's not fully complete, but I should make that complete though. I did, however, use the chat function before. I'm sure those that do have Handshake receive messages a lot from recruiters, seemingly like very general messages that appear to be sent to everybody. Well, I received one of those and thought, this seems like an interesting opportunity. So I actually replied back to the recruiter that messaged me, and lo and behold, he replied 2 days later. I was interviewing with that company. So it's actually not a shot in the dark. I always thought it was just a shot in the dark, like what's Handshake going to do? But my experience is it actually worked. The one time I really put effort into using Handshake, it was successful. So I would say, and also just in general, don't waste any opportunity that's available. So yeah, definitely. I think it works based off of that experience.
And we've got one more great question here. Is freshman year too soon to start thinking about internships?
I have a great story on that, actually. It's how I landed my first internship. It's absolutely not too soon. This is the time you would want to be getting an internship. The way I think about it is the sooner you can gain work experience, the more you can build that professional work experience and, encounter situations that would make you a much better candidate in the future. And so when you think about it years down the line, you're able to look towards your sophomore year and say it's kind of like a compound effect. The benefit of having something freshman year is it makes you that much more unique of a candidate in sophomore year because it's very difficult to land one freshman year. And so if you're coming into sophomore year to a company that's looking to hire sophomores and you already have work experience, you have a leg up, which means you have a higher chance of getting, landing your most favorite, most desired company sophomore year if you have that previous work experience. And to be clear though, too, it doesn't have to be an internship, whether it's research, work experience from an internship or something like local that you find, as long as you're getting something that, you really challenges you to develop professionally, that's good. But towards my experience, actually Purdue's career fair, I was going around looking at companies and many of them had told me, you're just a freshman, this isn't what we're looking for. And I had plenty of experiences in high school and, through my coursework as well. And it came to the point where I told, actually, I told a recruiter, I understand that I'm a freshman, but I have really great experience. I'm very confident in my ability. I want to learn and I want to be challenged. And, you're not really good, or I didn't say you're not going to. I think I said something like, I'm going to be a very unique candidate who's incredibly passionate about learning and will do the best that they can every single day in this role. And, I've come here for a reason. And so I'd really appreciate it if you would reconsider. And I actually walked away to go help because I was helping run the career fair and, went to a different station. And then 5 minutes later, I got a call from the lead recruiter at that company who was at the fair and said, Hi, I apologize for the misunderstanding. It seems you're really enthusiastic about joining us for an internship, and we'd like to set you up with an interview. So I went from being rejected because I was a freshman to then, telling them in a very respectful way, right? It's not like an argument. You have to be very respectful. But, I understand, like, you kind of own that you're a freshman, but like, that's where I say focus on enthusiasm and passion and your energy, and that will sell a lot as a freshman in order to get an internship that early. Focus on things, understand you're lacking some work experience. We'll focus on other things that can compensate for lacking for work experience. So high energy, very, very high enthusiasm, passionate energy, and that stuff should really take you far.
Awesome. And I know we have several freshmen who are with us today. So for all of you freshmen in the audience, stay on in this discussion. This is for you too. You're going to get a lot of great tips, and you should definitely be applying in this upcoming internship season. We've got another question, which was actually one of the questions we were just about to cover. Are there any job boards that either of you maybe don't recommend? I hate to call out job boards by name, but feel free to, if you need to, call out a few by name that maybe didn't work as well for you, or ones that you really don't encourage people to visit when they're looking for internship postings.
Yeah, I can go ahead and take this one just in the natural order. And so actually, ironically, when Handshake was brought up, I had to do a quick Google search on what is Handshake. I've never used it before. I've heard about it. That being said, and so to me, I was like, would I use it? Maybe not. But it's not like I wouldn't say I wouldn't recommend it. I think Matt said earlier, an opportunity is an opportunity. And that's kind of the whole mindset towards getting internships is, it's difficult. Many people are looking for jobs, especially now during COVID. And the market, if you think about it like a market, is very tight. Not many employers are hiring as much as they had simply because they don't have the resources. Hiring has been very difficult during this. At least that's my experience, having spoken with some recruiters. And so I think an opportunity is an opportunity, and a job board posting is, an opportunity to be able to look at who is searching for jobs, which internships are available that you're interested in. And so I would not necessarily recommend not using one. However, ones that I would prefer and support over others would definitely be company web pages. That is always my go-to because you can see the job number, and we'll get into this later. A lot of when I apply for internships, like at this point, like currently, I'll very rarely apply for a job without trying to network with someone in that HR department because you increase your odds immensely by having somebody as a network connection willing to support your application or willing to give your application a review because you've demonstrated interest through networking. And usually the easiest way to do that is directly through the company webpage saying, I applied to job number 12345, and I'm very interested in this engineering internship. Would you be willing to review my resume as a potential candidate? That's typically how I go. So company web pages are my number one. There isn't one that I've had a bad experience with though. Matt, I'm not sure if you have ones on your end though, so feel free to add.
Well, yeah, like what we had talked about, Mike, before as we were preparing for this was we don't discount any job board at all. Like even Mike said, like he was introduced to Handshake, and well, having never heard of it, he's like, oh, what's Handshake? It's just because you never hear of it. He had never heard of it before. But even if it's something you never heard of before, an opportunity to find something, to find a role is an opportunity to find a role. So really, and Handshake ended up being really awesome for me. So basically, yeah, don't discount any job board is our take.
And to add an additional
Go ahead,
question in
Debbie.
here, so do you use LinkedIn and Google and Handshake, etc.? Would you use those more as the, like, let's say the want ad, to use an old school term, and then go to the company webpage where it's cross-posted, hopefully, and then apply through there rather than using the easy apply buttons and all those things?
100%. That's what I do. 100%. That is what I do, like all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Go
They're
ahead.
definitely a great way to see what's out there. And, and I think from my, from what I've heard, I kind of had an in-depth conversation with a recruiter at a very large and competitive company. I'm talking about what they do, and they have a software that's able to go through all of those job boards where they have postings and synthesize all the results. So it's not like if you see a job on LinkedIn and you also see it on Handshake and it's the same job and it's on their careers page, you don't have to apply 3 times. Like it'll always go back to like their internal HR recruiting system and they'll see your application for that job. So I think it's totally probably user preference. I mean, we all have our own preferences and what works best for us and what we understand best, what we found most successful. And so I think honestly, that's probably how you should take the various job boards. But again, I think as from Destination Internship, company websites is the very big way to go, in my opinion, because if you always have your application on file with that company, then it's not like you submitted for a single job within LinkedIn. It's your application is internal within the company, and then they can potentially look at your position and your application and your candidacy and say it may not be best for this position, but his keywords and stuff match another position. I'm not sure if that works the same way with LinkedIn or Google search for jobs, but to me, and I just feel a lot safer going directly to the source with the company in terms of the job pages.
Yeah, I don't mean to keep prolonging this conversation because I know we have other things to discuss, and I'm sure there's lots of other questions. But even today, actually, I had an experience where I applied to a company on their website 2 years ago, and they asked me if I was interested in a role today. I got an email from them today saying if I was interested in a role, and it was like 1.5 to 2 years ago when I applied. So I'm not sure what happened there, but I was still in the system somehow and was able to get contacted. So like Mike said, there is a point to your profile always being in the company system.
Awesome. Thank you both. So we're going to jump into the actual application process. There is a question in the queue from a guest, and we're going to answer that along with talking about some best practice tips for completing applications and, of course, submitting resumes, whichever one the employer might be asking for. So I'm going to start with the guest question for this section. So during the school year, when should you start applying for internships that are coming up in the summer?
I would say now is the time to start and to get that ball rolling, because if you wait, then you might miss the ball on that. But if you do it now and say the company's large enough and big enough, I would think in general they have an idea of what the headcount might be come summer. So they're already anticipating how many people they're going to hire and whatever the payroll might be. So all those details, but that's not really relevant to us right now. What's relevant is, yeah, they're planning ahead already for that. A lot of at least in my experience, I received summer internships this time of year, and actually also in the spring. So it's pretty much from now all the way through, I would say April is the hiring season for summer internships in my experience. But I'd say now is prime time.
In addition, if I can add, Matt covered everything for next summer, but there's plenty of companies and firms, depending on what industry you're looking at, that will be hiring for the 2023 summer this winter. And so it depends on the type of industry and the company that you're looking at. Different companies have different timelines on when they want their internships. So again, we reinforce that principle of do it now, because if you wait 3 months, you may miss the deadline. It's better to investigate now so that you can know the deadline may be in December and you don't miss it. There are certain industries, like I know like the financial services industry typically tends to hire like a year early. And I'm not sure the exact timelines, but I know applications open at certain companies a year early. So like 2023 will be open in a couple months. And so It depends on kind of what company you're looking at and what industry it is, because each industry kind of has its own timeline. That being said, start now, start as early as possible so that you don't miss those deadlines.
And this is kind of a dual purpose question, a little bit about finding positions and a little bit about applying. So you found some positions that were posted with all different dates, some newer than others. Which ones do you apply for? Do you only apply for the new ones? And if so, how far back is it okay to go in applying for things that maybe are a few weeks or a couple months old?
Yeah, I'd say the newest is always the best, because the newer it is, the more likely that the application's open and it's added to the queue of applications for somebody to look at once submitted. But the further out you go, you can't really guarantee that the post is still open. So it may have been a posting for a role, and then that posting closed, but for some reason or another, the company just left it up there and had missed taking it down off their website, or it was put onto a job board and the job board still has it up even though it's old. So that's basically the recommendation there. However, I think it's really valuable to even go through those older postings, and the value in that is exploring what roles might be open in the future. For example, you could find a role that's 7 months old and that's not posted recently, but you can tell that that opportunity might appear in the future, and overall it's just a good opportunity to explore what's available. I would say in general, anything within the past month is probably fair game. At least that's what I do. Like if I were to say what I do, anything in the past month, maybe 2 months is fair game to apply to. Outside of that, I get a little I just feel like that might be a little too far back.
Okay.
But yeah, that's just the way I take it. I'm not sure exactly how companies do it, so it's really up to the company though.
Okay. And we just got another great question in terms of applications.
Mhm.
Guests would like to know about your experiences, either Matt or Mike, in landing internships that are far away from home. And this particular person is asking about, if you have to think about doing leases and moving, etc. Is that a good way to go, or do you recommend staying a little closer to your home base?
Well, I think we've both experienced being at home and both experienced being away. As a matter of fact, at SpaceX, we were both at the same site. So we in Texas. So we lived together, believe it or not. That was kind of crazy, but well, not crazy. Crazy that we ended up together. It ended up being great. We get along well, obviously we do, but that was a fun experience. But in general, if you're going somewhere away from home, my experience has been the company will provide some sort of reimbursement for transportation to that location, as well as a monthly stipend for housing, or they'll set up a housing for you. So basically, you get a sum of money and you figure it out yourself, or housing is already predetermined and it is just all set up for you. So really, it's not terribly difficult to manage being somewhere that's far away from home. Maybe the difficulty would be if you're going somewhere where the culture is totally different. Then maybe okay, you have to adapt to a different culture. But that's not really a bad issue. That's a good issue to have, because then you can explain in the next interview you have how you adapted to a place with a different work environment, different culture, yada yada yada. So overall, it's really a non-issue being somewhere far away from home, unless there is really something that has to keep you at home, which also really isn't a big issue. So it all works out in that.
Yeah, to add, overall, I think it depends on what you want and the opportunity. If it's a great opportunity for you that happens to be far away from home. Did I lose? Okay, I'm back on. Sorry. If there's a great opportunity and it's far away from home, I think you still, take the opportunity. It's kind of, I feel like it's kind of weird saying this, like I'm like 20, but I feel like from what I've learned, that's just kind of life. Like if there's an opportunity and you have to move, like you'll get used to it and you'll probably encounter it sometime in the future. So why not prepare for it now? It's more of, you learn professionally on your internship while you can develop personally, moving away from home, adapting to a new culture. So I think it's a great experience. It's nice to have. It can boost your confidence if you're looking for a position that's away from home during full time. But again, you could also though prefer to be with your family. It's really overall a personal decision, what you value and what you're looking for in your internship. I think it's just really a personal decision.
Great, thank you. And so, also in terms of applying, if a cover letter is not required, they're just asking for a resume or CV. Do you put a cover letter anyway?
I usually don't. I think the time spent crafting a cover letter that's very specific to the company, um, in my experience, I'd rather spend that finding other positions to apply to or applying to other positions, because to make the cover letter worthwhile, you have to craft it specifically to the role or the company, and that takes time and effort. Not to say that that's a bad thing, but in general, I like to spend that time finding other positions to apply to, maybe networking or doing something else that would help me get a role. That said, if the role does require the cover letter, then then I got to do the cover letter, and I do put in the time and effort to craft it and be individual and specific and really well written. But my this is my perspective at least. I'm not sure what other people think, but I would say a cover letter is very one dimensional because, I'll call it two dimensional, because you can talk through the cover letter and explain your experiences, but it's like reading a text. Have you ever read a text message and just read the text in a way that the person just didn't mean to send it? Because all you're reading is the text. You don't get the emotion, you don't get the verbal or the nonverbal cues. All it is the text. And if somebody's reading your cover letter, you can't be the person to make them interpret it one way or another. So you might write a sentence that sounds really good and written in your personality, but they would read it in a negative way. So there's potential, there is that potential that happens, and then you could get dinged because of your cover letter. So for me, I just like to not include it, and I like to, let my personality come through in an interview and just let my resume speak for itself, as opposed to trying to do things through the cover letter.
And that brings up a great guest question here. What should be in a good cover letter? What do you recommend?
So in my cover letter, and again, I would only put a cover letter if it is required, because like Matt said, like you can resubmit your resume or modify it, slightly depending on the role, how different the role is. But you really want to tailor your cover letter towards the position and company that you're submitting it for. And so a good cover letter to me usually includes who I am. So a brief introduction on my experiences, where I go to school, my academic level or kind of year level. So like in this case, I'm a junior. And then also include, past experiences that are specifically relevant to the position. Then my next paragraph is why I'm specifically interested in that company. So, usually expressing interest and then 2 to 3 reasons why I'm interested. And for each reason, usually one supporting sentence to show how, some type of personal connection to that particular interest. And then the big thing I do is highlight, or I don't want to say big thing I do, that's rather informal, but like the key thing I make sure to add is highlight 3 experiences and kind of values or traits that are important to that position or that company that I also possess, and add a supporting details, a few sentences describing how I've embodied them and shown them in the past. And so, yeah, I can't think of an example off my head, but for example, like the role requires you to be detail oriented. Like, for example, I would put, detail oriented. So like it says like for, some of the traits that I would bring to this position, or I can't forget the exact language, but then it's like detail oriented, and then describing a scenario where I was required to be exceptionally thorough and very exact in my work. And then I kind of do that for three specific areas so that they do get, like, they don't get this general like idea of I'm expressing interest and you have general information about my experiences, but it gives them a taste of some very deep information on some of my experiences and what I have learned and what I have actually implemented into results and action.
And in addition to, of course, we tailor our cover letters when we need to send them. Do you recommend tailoring your resume and making it different for every application?
I can take this one too. And so I tailor my resume when it's a very different application. So if you're applying for a different industry or a different role, so say you're looking for an engineering role versus, or an investment banking role versus a program management role, all of those are kind of looking for different things in your resume that they would want to see you have previous experience on. And so I would change my resume for each of those three roles that I would be applying to. If I'm applying for, manufacturing engineering internship, and I'm also applying for like a factory operations or process optimization internship, I'm probably not going to change my resume. It just depends on how different the role is from the resume that you originally created and tailored that resume to. That's kind of how I go about changing. I did create like applying. So like I mentioned, I'm majoring in industrial engineering as well as finance. I have I have like an engineering resume, and then I have a finance and business resume. Focusing on two very different things. One, a lot of software and programming skills and very results driven. The other, business, kind of a bit more higher level thinking, showing a bit more of program management, cross-functional leadership, communication with executives, and then overall results driven and at a high level view. And so there's two but again, that's why engineering focus is a bit more detailed, whereas my finance resume fits a little bit more towards the business and financial kind of industry. So it depends on how different the roles are.
Great. And we have a guest question we're going to get to in just one second. But before that, so you sent in your application or applications and you don't hear back. Should you contact the employer? What's been your experiences?
I would say 110% is yes, you should contact if you have a contact at the company already. So say you went to a career fair, you met somebody from that company at the career fair, and for example, they gave you they gave you their phone number or email, and then you apply online, but you don't hear back in a couple weeks or within like the time frame they may have suggested you would have heard back. I would 100% do that. And the reason I would do that is because first off, maybe it would just get the cycle going. Maybe they're delayed in going through the process of reviewing resumes, reviewing applications. And second, it kind of eases your mind too. If they reply, the worst that can happen is they can reply and say, sorry, no, you didn't get it. But then you can deal with that quicker and sooner rather than later. But then the best that can happen is they say, oh, yeah, as a matter of fact, we did review your application. We like it. We just haven't had a chance to reach out to you yet. I don't want to speak for Michael, but I know that that's something that he's experienced before. Mike, you could nod your head yes or no. I think it was one of your internships, or maybe not, I forget. But basically you hadn't heard back, you emailed, and then that day they replied and said, oh yeah, wait, we did mean to get back to you. You got the job. So, but that was after an interview. So same thing, application or interview, following up and having that communication and showing you're, I guess, excited is really important, in my opinion. But you also want to walk the fine line of being needy and annoying and being inquisitive and trying to actually find out the status of your application.
Great, thank you. And we've got a cool question here that doesn't quite fit in this discussion topic, but we're going to do it anyway because it's really very relevant. So you both obviously have had a lot of summer internships. Have either of you taken the opportunity to take a full semester off and do a co-op? And is there any significant benefit to doing co-ops versus internships?
So I'm currently on a co-op right now and had co-op this past spring. So I'll be having intern for an entire year, and Matt has experienced the same thing last year. And there is a to it because your internship is probably extended between a month and a half to potentially 3 months. You definitely have way more time to be involved on a much larger project, as well as be more immersed into your team and the company and the culture as well. And so having co-ops are definitely a huge experience, mainly because you're there for a longer time. By being there for a longer time, there's ripple effects, as I just mentioned, where you're able to engage in longer, usually larger, and usually more demanding and impactful projects than a typical 10 to 12-week summer internship. Additionally, you're able to experience more of the culture and engage more with the team and create and grow your internal network much more. So I would definitely recommend co-oping. But again, I think it's important to fit your own situation because you have to balance when you want to graduate versus whether or not co-oping is a good idea. And there's a lot of preferences. So is it necessary? No. Could it be potentially nice if you're looking towards towards growing an industry and you don't mind pushing back your graduation? Yes, that's very helpful. Also, I would investigate opportunities that your college has in order to take online classes or get credit for some things while you're on co-op, because that could help with the graduation date situation.
That was a great question. Thank you both so much for sharing your experiences. We're going to move into another question from our guest. So, how does someone handle including their grade point average uh, on their application or resume? And what is the threshold for including it? And how does someone handle it if they're taking a semester off with no official GPA yet? So someone who might be on a co-op or something away from school.
I would say if like in general, it's I think a required, usually it's a required component of an application when you're applying online. But I guess the other area where this concern comes up in is, should I put it on my resume? And I would say yes. And I would say yes because usually if you don't, then it leaves a bigger question mark of why didn't they put their GPA on the resume? So I would say yeah, I think it's definitely something just always worth having on there. And in the case that you don't have it, say you just don't have an official GPA, you can maybe put a new line on your resume for high school GPA and maybe do like a little asterisk, be like official GPA not yet computed or something like that. So it at least explains away why that's not there.
Yeah, and to add, well, just a quick point for formatting purposes, maybe you do like GPA where your college GPA would be if you don't have one, GPA colon N-A, which is not applicable. And you can simply tell them why it's not applicable if you don't have one yet. And that's typically what freshmen experience. So if you're coming in and you don't have a GPA yet, you haven't taken summer classes or anything, usually that N-A, why not? Well, I'm a freshman. But then if you have a lower GPA, and I've had people ask this in the past, like it is just a number, I would own it and find a story to tell with the number. If it's lower, why is it lower? And ask yourself. And there's many different reasons that I've talked with friends about people who are like really nervous about their GPA. I've been a mentor at Purdue and talking with some of my mentees who maybe have struggled when they were freshmen, and they're freaking out saying, I have a low GPA, I'm never going to get hired. And you ask yourself, why did you have a low GPA? Some of them have had crazy family lives that they've had to go through. And it was a very big challenge. And they've overcome some of those obstacles. And so your GPA may be low, but you can find an empowering story behind it. And so I would focus on how can you frame the narrative of your GPA to support you and give yourself as much credit as possible. Because in the end, it is just a number, and there's so many experiences that amount to that GPA. I mean, being in college, we all know a GPA is what you get at the end of the semester, but that's far from what you remember about that semester. Your semester is full of experiences, it's full of relationships and ebbs and flows of life and projects as well, tests, challenges, struggles, and positives, great memories as well. So what can you focus on that changes the narrative of that low GPA to really empower yourself and give yourself as much credit as possible? If it was one bad assignment, how did you recover and fix your grade for the rest of the class where you were on trajectory to not pass, but you ended up improving your grade immensely and turned it around and learned a lot? Or you had some personal challenges. How did you get through those? What did you learn? How did you grow? Because recruiters are people too. They're not a robot, and they're going to see, oh, you have a low GPA. Well, I'm going to forget about you. Like, they want to know about you as a person. And I think that usually gets overlooked a lot. So I definitely try and shape a narrative with your GPA, to really end up empowering you as much as possible.
Wonderful. We're getting some great questions tonight, everybody. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a quick thing, I guess, before we move on to the next topic. This is a little unrelated, but I wanted to mention it while we were still on applications. Really, really important in terms of the technicals of submitting an application. A lot of people don't do this, but it's really important from what I've heard talking to recruiters, is when you attach your resume, attach it as a PDF. Mike, I'm not sure if you've heard this before, but recruiters don't really like Word documents when the resume is attached as a Word document. So that's something I would try to keep an eye out for, unless of course it asks for a Word document, or some other document. But usually attaching a PDF is the gold standard, is from what I've heard talking with recruiters, when you attach a resume or other document to your application. So I know it's kind of out of left field at this point in the conversation, but that's something to keep in mind.
That's an awesome tip, because Word can be in a million different versions. Everyone can open a PDF, so that's great. It's also great for when you put up your PDF resume, that one tends to fill in the application better if you're using a system. Sometimes when it sees Word documents or Google Docs, it goes a little crazy. So that's a wonderful tip. We're going to transition into talking about networking. And yes, as college students, you can and should be networking right now. And even in the time of COVID, we can network. We could network in person, social distanced, of course. We can also network a lot virtually. And we're going to talk about expanding your professional network now while you work towards your degrees. So first of all, let's talk about LinkedIn. It was mentioned earlier, and can either of you talk about your experiences using LinkedIn to network?
Well, LinkedIn, we've definitely both of us. I don't mean to speak for you, Mike, but we've both had positive experiences using LinkedIn, not just to connect with people, but also to get the ball rolling on interviews for eventual job offers or internship offers. So 100%, we've had very positive experiences on LinkedIn. That's granted if you do it right, and we've definitely experimented a lot with LinkedIn to figure out, in our experience, what works, what doesn't. So like some of the practices I was using on LinkedIn 2 years ago I've totally phased out, because I realized those aren't the ones that are generating results. So I guess our goal tonight is to share what some of the things we've learned that actually did work for us. So in our experience, LinkedIn is definitely a positive means to network and make connections.
And let's talk about how. LinkedIn's a big, gigantic, endless place. Where does one start networking virtually on LinkedIn?
Well, so I'll start. It all starts with having a good profile, having a good presence, and how people receive you on LinkedIn. So with that in mind, the profile is by far the most important aspect. And by profile, I'm talking good headshot. So maybe a professional photo, nothing that you'd put on like Instagram or Facebook, like, I don't know, posing in front of a statue. Just, it's got to be professional and good, correct grammar, and high quality metrics and data points. A lot of people will put stuff that doesn't necessarily belong on LinkedIn on LinkedIn. By that, I mean things that are irrelevant to what a potential employer would be interested in. So overall, having a profile that's complete and really descriptive of yourself and your experience is really important.
And where do you go from there? How do you start making connections?
Yeah, I would start based on your proximity. And this could be a multi-tiered approach. Proximity to what? It could be proximity to your university, to where you've grown up, to where your high school is, to where you want to be, to companies you've worked in the past. I would start, it's kind of, you take it like concentric circles and growing your network. You start small and start near you if you're at the center point of your network. And then you occasionally can branch out to further and further degrees of connection to where you may not, this may be somebody at a company you've never worked at a place you've never lived in, at a school that you've never had connected with. And eventually you get to that point. But I would start with somebody, I'm not sure, like for me, for example, I go to Purdue, start networking with Purdue alumni in roles that I am particularly interested in. At companies I'm particularly interested in. And that way we already have an easy conversation and connection point, as well as why would they be inclined to help you? Well, some people may feel a very strong alumni relationship with that university and they'd want to support and mentor, a younger student looking to achieve a similar career path. And so I think going at based on something with proximity is going to be very important as long as it's something relevant to yourself or to what you want to do or what you're passionate about. I think it's a great way to start networking. So main thing, try and find an overlapping similarity between the two. It could be where you lived, where you go to school, your interests, or a job that you want. But as long as there's an overlapping similarity, there's, there's like a dotted, think about like a dotted line to that. So like you're a pin and this person you want to connect to is a pin also. Having that overlapping similarity is like a dotted line, reaching out to them and actually establishing that connection makes it solid and makes that a resource for you to use in the future. But again, they're not just resources, they're people too, and could end up growing into great friends. So that's another point too.
And how do you recommend connecting for those of us who may be established on LinkedIn or just getting started? I think we know we can all hit that connect button a million times and we can just add people, but will they add us? And so, do you recommend personalizing your invitations to connect, or do you just use that kind of standard LinkedIn gives you, I'd like to connect with you via LinkedIn? Which one's been the most helpful for your purposes?
I can speak to this really quickly. I always like if it's like a serious action where I'm interested in growing, like targeted growing my network for a potential job in the future. I'm very interested in industry. I always add a personalized invite because that shows it kind of effort, right? Somebody appreciate and understand why you're connecting with them. Because usually, like when you get a connection on LinkedIn, it says so and so would like to join your network. If you get a personalized invitation, it says so and so would like to join your network, and it shows that personalized invitation. To me, when I've received both, and I get a different level of like interest in a person if they have a personalized invite. And so, like, that's not why I started doing personal invites, but I realized while I was doing personal invites, when I've received one, I was much more likely to like be interested and connect with and engage in a discussion with the person who sent the personalized invite because it kind of triggers your thought of, oh, like I want to talk to this person, see how they're doing, see how I can help them, or what's going on. So if you send a personal invite saying, hey, I'd really like to connect because we're both, going to Purdue or we're both going studied at the same school on the same major, and I'm really interested in learning about what you do now and your company. It's much like there's actually a reason for the person to invest time in you. I guess I'll put it that way. Like you say, you're going to invest time in me for this particular reason. Hopefully, convincing them to invest time in you.
And I'm going to throw a little challenge out to our guest tonight. We do this when we do a lot of our discussions with college students. Um, Michael Cadis, Matthew Cadis, and myself, Debbie Burrell, we all have public profiles on LinkedIn. we would like to see you. We would like to connect with you, but we want you to find us. And so either now or later this evening or tomorrow, find us on LinkedIn, ask to connect. Feel free to personalize that invitation that you met us this evening on the engineering internships discussion or whatever you'd like to say. We would love to add to our networks and help you add to your professional network as well. And we're going to talk just one more minute or so about networking. So, obviously, we're doing a lot of online networking right now. Pre pandemic, we did a lot of in person networking. Post pandemic, and hopefully in the coming months, we'll be doing some more in person. What are your best practices, your tips for in person networking when we get more into that again?
I think in-person networking, if you're doing if you're doing in-person networking with the intent of like networking, I think it's really important to be prepared, because if you think about it, like LinkedIn, you're sitting behind your computer or your phone typing away. I want to do this and this and this with my future. And trying to make that connection with somebody, and you get a lot more time to think about what you're saying, to think about how you want to write your message. But in person, you can't predict at all what somebody's going to say. So you have to be prepared with with knowing what you're interested in and being able to communicate that to somebody, because networking also is, well, it is a way to share what you're interested in doing, but also it's a two-way street. So when you're in person, you also have to be receptive of the other person you're speaking with, talking to. So it's a lot more on the fly than over LinkedIn or over email or text. So there is a little bit more complexity to in person, but I honestly, either one works great. Arguably, in person's better, because it's just, you can shake somebody's hand, you can smile at them, you can look at them in the eyes. I don't know. There's just something about like meeting somebody in real life as opposed to just texting over LinkedIn and seeing their photo on a screen. So that's my take on it. Um, one thing also I wanted to add to the discussion we had on LinkedIn was, what this is like, I think the biggest takeaway here is when you're connecting with people on LinkedIn and your goal is to try to get your resume out to a person that's looking to hire, there's two things you really want to look for. And that's the two things you want to look for in somebody you're connecting with. You want to find somebody that has like influence in the process. So somebody that actually is able to put your resume in front of the right eyes. That could be a recruiter, that could be somebody in the role that you want to be in, or it could even be a hiring manager. And I've actually had success on LinkedIn connecting with all three types of those people. So those are all examples of people that actually have the influence to put your resume in front of the right eyes. The second part of the puzzle is finding somebody that has the willingness to actually do that. So if you can combine the influence and the willingness, then that's like a recipe for success. So what I mean by willingness is they're willing to actually forward your resume to the hiring manager. They're willing to go into the application system and star it to say, we want to interview this person. So like I said, when you can connect with somebody and make a connection with somebody that has influence and also has the willingness to help you, that, like I said, is the recipe for success. In a quick minute, what I mean by, I guess, willingness to help you, how can you identify that? I would say, in my experience, somebody that's really active on LinkedIn, maybe sharing posts that they're hiring, or somebody that, well, like I said, that they're hiring, or somebody that shares that they just want to help people. I know some people on LinkedIn will make posts how they're willing to just talk with potential candidates. So overall, that's kind of like I guess the recipe for success with connecting with people on LinkedIn. However, I would say there's a fine line between going overboard and doing it the right way, because LinkedIn is something that people use for their own professional endeavors, and you don't want to be messaging a manager on LinkedIn who has no interest in connecting with potential candidates on LinkedIn. That's really not the right way to do it. That can get really annoying and can just leave a sour taste in somebody's mouth if they're using LinkedIn to get their own next job, but then they have somebody messaging them to try to get a job at their own company. So you really have to be conscious of that fact so you don't annoy people, and you don't bother, you only reach out to people that would actually welcome that connection or that message on LinkedIn.
And to add here, I think those are good 2 points, Matt. To add here is, in the end, it's kind of like a numbers game. I think about it a lot like yield rate. I don't know, maybe that's like the industrial engineering background part of me. But eventually when you send out connection requests, you're only going to hear back for a certain amount of them, right? You got to think maybe like 30% of the people you reach out to aren't on LinkedIn frequently. And by the way, when I say this, you can control Matt's 2 points is the willingness of somebody to help you, and then the capability of them to help you. You can usually identify people who are capable of helping you or who may have influence in the hiring process, like recruiters or senior managers or hiring managers, people saying I'm looking to hire. A lot of that stuff you can do, due diligence on your own. Willingness to help you, you're not sure. That's where the yield rate comes in. And don't be afraid to not get responses. There's plenty of times where I have plenty of invitations from a long time ago where nobody's ever responded to me. And that's okay. The point is that you're getting yourself out there and you're trying to reach out and connect. I wouldn't take personal offense if somebody doesn't reach out to you. It simply means either they're not willing, which to Matt's point, we should be respectful of that and understand they may be looking for their own professional advancement and not willing to help others because they may be in a tough state or just not wanting to, right? That's totally fair. And that may be why you've never gotten a reply or somebody declined to connect or something like that. But then there's also situations where, as long as you cast the net out wide, there's a chance that there's people who will be willing to help you in general. So I'd just say cast the net out wide is probably the best, strategy in terms of finding people who are willing to help you.
Wonderful. And we are going to transition into our next topic, which is the big one, the interview. You've put out the applications, you've gotten the call, and the calls will come. We promise the calls will come. How do you get ready? Let's talk about some interview preparation best practices. What do you do to get ready for the big day?
I think what's really important is actually understanding what you're getting into. If you've ever played sports, like the sports analogy would be, football players. Football, you watch film on your opponent to understand what they're doing, what their play is, what formations they run. I don't know. Michael played football, so he probably has a better idea of everything football related. But basically, you want to know what you're getting into. So how do you actually figure out what you're getting into? Usually what will happen is when the recruiter or person setting up the interview reaches out to you, they'll tell you what the format of that interview is and how long it is. So they might say it'll be behavioral questions, maybe 5 to 8 of them over the course of 30 to 45 minutes. And then you have a pretty solid idea of what you're getting into. If you don't get that, there's really no issue in actually asking the recruiter or person that set up the interview what the format is. And I think that's really important because then you don't go in to a situation where you get something unexpected, because then there's nothing really that you could lose by asking. You just don't, you have everything to gain by knowing what exact type of interview you're going into. Obviously, they're not going to share questions, but they might say it'll be half technical questions, half behavioral or whatever. So that's something I think is really important to getting prepared. Also is understanding the type of team or role that it is. You can always ask the recruiter too what team it is that you're interviewing with. And that way you can actually be prepared to go search on the careers website for roles that team has posted before. And you can get an idea of what that team does. Or you can search on LinkedIn for that team and see who are people that might be on that team and see what they actually do in their daily roles. So I would say clearing the unknowns is really the first step in succeeding. And then after that, once you get an idea of what you're going into, becoming really familiar with your experiences in your resume to be able to talk about your resume and your experiences really well in the context of the team or the type of interview that you have.
To further Matt's last point that he just made, I think I always take things from a conceptual basis. So if I can have a strong fundamental understanding, I can apply it to more specific situations. And so one thing that really helps me when I prepare for an interview is going through my resume and for each bullet point, kind of writing out. So we typically hear the STAR method, which actually Matt and I recommend the START method. So situation, task, action, result. In addition, transferable skills is that last T. So identifying, within that experience, what are transferable skills to help you in the role. One of the things that I always do to help me, regardless of looking at questions, is going through each of my experiences and saying, okay, what was the situation, task, action, and result? And then what are transferable skills? But I kind of write a paragraph and my own thoughts and do some deep reflection about that experience and that particular bullet point, that particular detailed experience that I made note of. So that, I, instead of finding experiences to answer questions, I'm finding experiences that can support questions that I may be asked. So it's kind of working the opposite, is understanding. I mean, you can kind of think it of like a duel. I don't know, like a kind of like a, I don't know, somebody mentioned like Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr and like how they dueled each other a long time ago. And in my work the other day, and I guess it's not related to work, but it's kind of like, how much ammunition do you have? Like how much, can you prepare for different questions that can be thrown your way? How many experiences can you, fire back at the interviewer and say, like, I kind of think about it, so like Matt said, I played football. I'm like a competitive person, I guess. And so I kind of think of it as like a challenge. Like, can I really show why I deserve this position and why I belong in this role to this interviewer? And so I think, whatever questions they throw me or any things that they try and stump me with, or, types of things they want to know about me, am I putting my best foot forward and giving my best effort every single answer? And the way I do that is documenting very detailed each of my experiences and saying, what did I learn here? And do a deep reflection. So in some experiences, like there may be more than one, right? So if I had to lead a cross-functional team, which I did at Tesla, what were the experiences in that? Well, there was a lot of challenges. There was a lot of inclusive leadership that I had to build, a lot of unique strategies that I had to work on, a lot of different personalities that I had to balance within that cross-functional team. So you go from having just one answer to a technical question to now having that one experience can potentially answer a technical question, a personality question, a leadership question, an inclusivity question, right? So you make your experiences, much more applicable to different situations, and you understand, okay, I have this experience that can support my candidacy in these various areas. And if you get asked a question in one of those areas, you automatically know which experiences can fit. I think it's a lot better and a lot more nimble and agile than finding, one question, one experience, one question, one experience. And it also helps me make my interview, when I do it that way, it makes my interviews a lot more conversational. And in my experience, when your interview becomes more of a conversation, the more effective and the better it goes. And, you'll likely be hired because I'm sure they would enjoy conversing with people as well. And that means you're very confident, comfortable, and had effective responses.
Yeah, I would say, like, I'm sure you'd agree with me, Mike. If we were to agree on one main takeaway in preparing for interviews, it would be taking your resume and, say it's a Word document, copying that, pasting that into a new Word document, and then literally under every single line, just writing everything you can remember about that experience in this Word document. Like you said, writing a paragraph, because then you start documenting every single little detail, and that helps you just remember it so that a year later you're not going to forget. But also it helps get ideas in your head of how you can talk about it during an interview. Mike, I'm not sure if you've had this experience, but my experience has been that if I start writing a lot about about one of my previous internships or something, and I just start typing away, phrases will come to my head of a good way to phrase something. So I might come up with like a five word phrase of how, hey, maybe this is a good way to actually say this experience. Because then you start really sifting through your thoughts, and things become a lot more clear, and you start to be able to understand all your experiences and how, like you said, Mike, they could sort of be used as just like ammunition in this interview to just pull an experience out of your pocket to throw at any question that might be asked of you.
And do you recommend bringing notes into an interview, or maybe their questions? Do they get in the way, or do you find them helpful?
Personally, I have a pre-interview music playlist that I listen to about 15 to 20 minutes before every interview, and I disregard my notes. To me, that helps me set up the stage for having a conversation. I think it gets me into a very natural and excited, enthusiastic state. And, I really focus on doing the due diligence and the preparation. Um, you know, like maybe you cram it, right? And that's totally cool. But that last 20 minutes, I think I try and de-stress and be my natural self, and try and relax and focus on having a conversation. Um, and in a way, it's kind of, building confidence, to know that you'll be able to have experiences for the questions that they ask you. But I also think it just really helps engage the recruiter or whoever's interviewing you on a more personal level if you can be your most authentic self in the moment. Ultimately, you want to portray your best self at every moment. And to me, when I had notes with me, and I've tried it before, looking over notes and having things around, that's not really my authentic self. That's usually me stressed or anxious and trying to say the right answer rather than my personal answer. And to me, having a personal and unique answer that fits my personality, sometimes it's aligned, right? But I really want to focus on being authentic rather than correct, because in the end, there really isn't a correct answer. Um, it's kind of your experiences. There's no right or wrong. Does it fit the question? And as long as it generally does, you're good to go. And I think having enthusiasm and personality is an incredibly important part of the interview that usually gets significantly overlooked.
And we're gonna cover one more thing before we get to a guest question. Appearance. Some of us we're still there still are, of course, virtual interviews going on. There's of course some in-person interviews starting. Appearance wise, how do you prep for either of these situations?
I think just you have to like dress for success is really all I can say to that is whatever like dress for success means to you is what you got to do to just present yourself the best you can, in a really general and broad sense. Now in terms of virtual interviews, one thing I've found really useful is like if you can get a desk lamp to improve the brightness on your face, that is absolutely incredible. On Amazon, I think they sell little lamps, or lights. I mean, I can show you this one right here. It was like $10. Well, you can't see it because it's all blurry, but it was like $10 off Amazon, and it will drastically improve the video quality. So honestly, that's definitely it's $5-10 worth the investment in my opinion. So just making sure, and you don't even have to do that. Just go to it. Make sure you're in a well lit room with a camera at a good height. You can do that all ahead of time, especially if it's a pre-recorded interview that's maybe a week away. You can figure this all out days before the interview and have yourself set up well beforehand to make sure the lighting, the camera angle, everything is sorted out.
And to add to that, of course, whether you're Zoom or Teams or however you're doing your virtual interview, they have all those, of course, those fun backgrounds. Mike and Matt have the blur. I've got my fancy little thing from Chicago Cheers Foundation. If you're not in a room that maybe doesn't have the best paint job, use that blur if you'd like, or set up a little scenario behind you that looks really pretty, like a nice little office or something like that, so that you're putting your best foot forward. Definitely, not only in terms of how you're speaking, like Matt and Mike talked about, but how you appear as well. Um, Elevator pitches. What do you guys think? Should you have one ready when they say, "Tell us about yourself"?
Yes, every kind of tell us about yourself question I answer, I always kind of start with an elevator pitch. It's just I've practiced it so many times that it just becomes natural, right? And so I've heard this statement. Actually heard this statement. So it's assuming you're 21 and older, right? But you should have your elevator pitch down so well that like whenever you're in a bar or like party or whatever, somebody should be able to ask you, regardless of however you're feeling, what your elevator pitch is. You should be able to deliver it. Like remote memory, like 30 seconds pointed and you at the same time. So like if like Debbie, you asked me about elevator pitch right now, I could fully deliver it, even though I haven't delivered one in a long time. That's kind of like the message behind it. So definitely have an elevator pitch, definitely have it memorized and prepared, but not like robotic. But as long as you have like your key points down is exactly how you want to deliver it, I think it's important to definitely have, because everybody's going to ask you. Now, usually I base the tell us about yourself question centered foundationally around the elevator pitch, but then also add some unique details. It try and relate to the interviewer if we've talked previously, or talked like a minute before on the call, and try and add some other details outside of the elevator pitch to not just keep it super professional, but to create that conversational atmosphere. But again, the elevator pitch is the foundation for every like tell us about yourself kind of question.
And
Great question for so those of us, or those of you who are just getting started in job hunting. One of our guests is asking, what's an elevator pitch? And just to fill you in, and then we're going to listen to Mike and Matt's. An elevator pitch, when you think about it literally, if you were getting in an elevator with someone and the doors closed and they turn to you and they'd say, hey, who are you? Tell us about yourself. You would deliver a brief summary of yourself in the time those doors close from when they open. And so it's really briefly describing yourself. And that's what an elevator pitch is. And Mike, tell us about yourself.
Sorry, I was muted. Of course. So again, my name is Michael Cadis, and I am a current Purdue student studying industrial engineering and finance. I'm in my junior year with 3 semesters remaining, and previously have experiences at SpaceX at their South Texas launch site location, as well as at Tesla at their Gigafactory. Currently, I'm interning at Apple in product operations, and I'm really enjoying that experience. Debbie, I noticed you're working for the Chicago Engineers Foundation. Well, actually, during my internship right now at Apple, I'm remote, and I have the fortunate opportunity to be able to stay in Chicago, where I've lived my entire life.
Awesome. Nice to meet you, Mike. And Matt, tell us about yourself.
Hi, well, my name's Matt Cadis, and I study electrical engineering at the University of Kentucky. My previous experience includes internships at SpaceX, Tesla, ExxonMobil, Johnson & Johnson, and John Deere. Through those experiences, I think the greatest strengths that I've developed are our abilities to learn quickly and adapt to different situations. So
Awesome.
really just short and sweet, and like highlights that you think are strongest.
Great. Nice to meet you as well, Matt. So that's kind of a brief idea of what an elevator pitch is. Do you guys practice before an interview, and how do you practice?
We practice with each other, to be honest. But that's just because, like, I mean, we're both like the same age, and in general, in the same time, like both in the fall time or both in the springtime, both going through interviews. So really, it could be anybody. I practice with friends too, just anybody to bounce ideas off of. Like, if you think you want to describe an experience a certain way, having a friend or somebody to bounce an idea off of is really, really important. So practicing in front of the mirror or practicing with somebody else is really important.
And to add to that, I think it would be great to do it with somebody who is unfamiliar of the experience you're describing. For example, I'm in the engineering student council, and if I'm preparing for a question, and we do like, yeah, a lot of times, like within your orgs, at least that's a lot of where my friend groups are. And so we'll kind of interview with each other, practice with each other. And like, I think if you describing an experience, like if I were describing an experience within the engineering student council, I typically wouldn't want to practice that response with members who are, in council with me, and are familiar with that experience. I would look to do it with somebody in a different org, or a friend who just completely cannot relate, because then that makes sure that you're being very clear and direct and concise, and that they can easily put themselves in their shoes, or put themselves in your shoes, to understand kind of what you were experiencing and what you learned from it. Because if you're doing it with somebody who worked on the same project as you, or worked on the exact same build as you or team as you, they'll know exactly what you're talking about, but an interviewer will have no clue. And it's very different in terms of the level of detail and clarity that you need to provide. And you want to be able to be clear in a way that you're not talking for, you know, a really long time and it becomes like a monologue. And so having practice on being clear yet concise with someone outside of that experience, I think is the best possible way to go.
Wonderful. And we're coming up towards the end of our session, and I want to make sure we leave time to talk about the next steps after an interview. What should you be doing now? And so, to either of you, follow up. What kind of follow up do you do after an interview is over?
I
Well, like you
can
said, we're at the end, so I'll blast through this. Mike, I guess you were just talking, but you can add on to this. I think we agree most important thing to do is send a thank you note or thank you email to your interviewers. That's really important if you are able to get in contact. And say you interview and you don't get the role, but you have the recruiter's contact who set up the interview. I think it's important to send a thank you email for the opportunity and that you'd like to stay in touch about future opportunities because you may have not been a perfect fit for that role, but you might be a good fit for another role at that time or in the future. So always keeping that connection alive is really important.
And what about should you continue to apply once you've had an interview, whether you had a great feeling about it or not, or do you sit and wait?
I would continue to apply absolutely because you really don't know. You can't take, I mean, you really don't know at that point. And so it's basically you haven't gotten the opportunity yet. Like you haven't been, offered the job yet. And so you still don't have like the job. And so I continue to apply and wait, and act as if you haven't received it until you ultimately do. And again, in terms of follow-ups, I typically follow up every 2 weeks, unless the recruiter gives you like a specific deadline otherwise, where they say, hey, like if they give you a deadline in 3 weeks, I wouldn't follow up in 2 weeks because they told you 3 weeks. But if they give you a deadline in 1 week, I would follow up at that deadline if I haven't heard anything back. Matt mentioned this before. I actually had to submit my housing for Purdue last year because I was virtual. And the day before housing, I had to submit for housing, I emailed Tesla and I was like, hey, I really apologize. Like, I just am trying to figure out housing. Like, do you happen to have a status on my application? And they got back and said, well, actually, ironically, we were going to email you today. Congrats, where you're going to be able to co-op next semester. And so that figured, happened to do it. So it's very flexible. Like if you have a deadline coming up, like you can let them know about the deadline and email them. Again, I think they're people too. And I mentioned this before, but having a conversation and being friendly and being personable, understanding them and yourself is important, and communication is the most important thing. If you have deadlines coming up with other job offers, definitely communicate that, right? And be respectful of their timeline and your timeline, communicating and trying to figure out a perfect balance between those.
Wonderful. And for all of our guests, we've gotten a lot of great questions tonight. Keep the questions coming throughout, and we'll also have a little Q&A session at the end of this event. Before we get there, I want to thank so much all of you for joining us today for Engineering Internships. It's been an absolute pleasure to host this discussion in partnership with the co-founders of Destination Internship. Many, many thanks to both of you, Matt and Michael, for sharing so many great tips and your experiences with all of us. You've truly given us a wealth of great information, and we thank you so much for helping your fellow students really get ready for this upcoming internship season and to help everyone put their best foot forward. A recording of this presentation, as we mentioned earlier, will be available to everyone later this week, and you're going to receive a link to the video via email. We've also created a best practices cheat sheet. It's all of the best and brightest of the tips that you learned today with Matt and Mike. They're all in a one pager, and so you have that as you move forward. More information about Destination Internship or Chicago Engineers Foundation can be found at our websites. CEF is chicagoengineersfoundation.org, and Destination Internship is destinationinternship.com. As we said also earlier, we all are on LinkedIn. We would love to hear from you and connect with you, so please reach out for questions, for comments, for resources. We are here to help in any way we can. Thanks again for joining us. And of course, best of luck as you get ready for the internship season. We look forward to hearing back, hearing how things are going. And again, stay in contact with us as you move forward so that we can be a part of your journey into your next best internship. Thanks so much.